Okay. Hi, everybody. Greetings. Welcome to a compassion dialogue with Caitlin Matthews. Do a proper introduction in just a minute. It's great to have you here, Caitlin. Thank you. Now, this is the compassion dialogues are hosted by the Spiritual Companions Trust. And one of the things we do is that we run the only Ofqual registered vocational qualification in spiritual companionship, spiritual caregiving, and spiritual coaching. So if that's of any interest to you, please go to the spiritualcompanions.org website and you'll see the diploma there. Now, usually when I introduce someone for the compassion dialogues, I actually prep and write a long piece of biographical thing, which I then read to you very carefully off the screen as if I'm not actually reading anything. And I thought I'd just leave it to spur of the moment because I absolutely love, respect, admire Kathleen Matthews. And it goes back a long time. I don't think I've ever told you this, Kathleen, but in my 20s, when I was getting very confused about the different streams of esoteric and occult teaching, I found Euron John's The Western Way. It was published then as 2 separate volumes. And I read it and just breathed a huge sigh of relief because it was a magnificent piece of research and practical work that absolutely explained a whole map to me. Since then, many of you will know who are watching this session, Kathleen has written 80 books, some with her partner, husband, John, some on her own. She was also a wonderful musician. And if you're ever lucky enough to be with her when she's playing, there's an enchantment that happens. And she lives in Oxford, but if she lived in Glastonbury, I would be a kind of irritating neighbor who was always finding an excuse to drop in for a cup of tea, right? And she's very forthright. So she'd always tell me to piss off if she didn't want me there, right? And she once told me when I cut my hair short, don't cut your hair short, look better with long hair. And then I grew a beard. And she said, don't grow a beard. Right? Anyway, so love her. I thank you for being in this session with us, Kathleen. Welcome. How are you? What's going on?
Thank you. It's lovely to see you. It's been such a long time since I think we're pre-COVID since we saw each other. Yes, yes,
Absolutely.
yeah. Although I am down in Glastonbury quite a lot because I teach nearby, so not in. I don't do things in Glastonbury very often. Although I am this year, I'll be there in May. But I'm teaching down at Compton Dundon quite a lot.
Okay, well, we need to hijack you for a cup of tea if
Yeah.
you've got the time.
Yeah, this is always the thing. I had someone write to me today and said, "So what time do we finish in the evening so we can have time off?" And I said, "There is no time off. If we had
Oh,
time off, it would be another day." So I never have time to greet people and see people because of that, because I'm teaching like 10 hours a day.
you are a workaholic, and you are a workaholic as you described in an email to me recently that you describe yourself sometimes as a freelance mystic.
Mhm.
So what I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, I would love to go back into your childhood
Mhm.
and for you to tell us something about how your workaholism started maybe in childhood and your mysticism. So what were your parents like? What was going on for you when you were about 4 or 5 years old? I mean, when did the influences
Well, I come
start to
from
be felt by you?
a completely non-cultural household, which had no books in it. And so most of my childhood was spent probably more or less in the other world because there wasn't a great deal of stimulus around me. Um, so I was also born very, very short-sighted. So um, I couldn't have, probably even at the distance I am from the computer, wouldn't have necessarily been able to recognize you as a child. I would needed to have hear you speak. And so um, basically, I learned as a child to sing into spaces so that I could work out where I was. I'm working on the principle of resonance. Um, and, because, the outside world was quite difficult, I spent a lot of my day under a blanket, completely tucked in, lying on the floor. And I was actually communing with what I called the shapers, who are like the phosphenes behind your eyes when you close your eyes after you've looked at bright light. But under the blanket, I could sort of control and understand that. And I suppose they were like the ones that taught me. But a lot of my childhood was quite dreamy and unstructured. I mean, my parents gave structure to now you do this, and now we go here, and now we see Granny or whatever. But but a lot of my time was really very interior, um, and I could read when I was 4, but there were no books in the house, so I'd read source bottles or newspapers, and my parents would not give me notebooks so I could write any of this interiority down. So I think this was probably the most formative
Where was this?
thing for this. In Portsmouth,
In Portsmouth. What kind of household was it? I mean,
it was very, I mean, my grandmother had been in the workhouse.
okay.
So no, my grandparents were not at all well off, and they had a lot of children, and so that was how my dad grew up. And our household was very. My father worked his way up from working on submarines as an engineer to working in the dockyard as a pay clerk. So he got into the white collar end of things, but just yes.
Did you have siblings?
I have one brother
Okay.
who was a reincarnated bus. As a
Did-
child, he didn't speak till he was 4, and he just made bus noises. He grew up to become a garage owner, so it's perfectly logical.
So sorry, I'm just really curious. When you say bus noises, what do you mean? Hong Kong?
Literally, he had a little pie plate, and he would
Okay.
go everywhere. Down, I mean, he'd conduct himself down the street that way, and
Okay.
God forbid wind should take his pie plate away from him. There were tears and protestations. So.
So what did your parents make of your inner world under the blanket, or did they not know
I
about
got
it?
used to it, and my mother would occasionally sort of poke me with a foot and say, "Are you all right down there? Can you still breathe?" Which was yes, I could, and I could do it for hours and hours and hours and hours.
All right, so what happened when you went to school? That was good,
Well,
bad.
I mean, there were books,
So you're happy.
there was plasticine, there were pencils, there was paper. Guess what happened? Yeah, so I really, was much happier at school than I was at home.
And how was your eyesight then? Were you wearing very thick purple
No,
glasses?
no, I did not wear any. Nobody knew how short-sighted I was until I was 10.
Really? Listen, I've got to just go back a few seconds. You said you were using sonar echoing
I'm
technology.
using I'm using resonance all the time, and of course, the thing that shows you, it does show you where the piano is and where the dog is on the floor and the sideboard and all these things, but it also shows you what's not there.
Just for all of us, just a tad more explanatory about how you'd actually use the resonance. Were you actually making noises or
Oh,
no?
so I sang all the time. So
Okay.
so it's that making sound, that issuing of sound, which is really entirely how I've steered my way around the world. And still today, if I don't understand something, I will sing at it.
And as a child, were you singing any kind of song or were you making them up?
I know this, it's the song that's eternally arising all the time. So it's never the same.
All right, let me pause you on that one because it's a good theme to hang on to as we talk. The song, the theme that is eternally arising.
Mm.
What do you mean by that?
Um, well, I don't know if you've ever been to a very, very quiet place away from any electricity or traffic noise or whatever, when you can actually hear the silence.
Mhm.
Yes. But most of the time, I mean, we're used to those exterior sounds around us, but there is another sound that's happening all the time, which if we listen to it, we can sing and tune into. And that's what I was doing all the time. That's why I needed these very long hours of silence and quietness, just lying on the ground. So I was listening to, and I was lying on the ground. So of course I was, really listening to that other sound that was happening.
To use another language, is that similar to the harmonics of Pythagorean, the
Possibly,
cosmic
I
ecosystem?
don't know what other people experience, so
Okay.
I can't sort of replicate it. But I know that I still do the same. If I'm say I'm in a new course center, I will still do exactly the same thing. I'll walk into the space and I'll sing, and then I'll know how I am to be there, or what might need to happen, or what might need to be cleared away, or whatever it is. So everywhere has the sound through it. It's like nowhere on earth can we not experience that. So I experience that as I mean, I'm getting older, so I'm getting a little bit deaf, and I often can't hear what John is saying next to me. I can hear to within an inch if someone raises the box lid outside that is for deliveries. He can't hear it, but I can pick up the resonance of it. Yes, so my resonance is very, very highly. So even if I were to lose my hearing, I'd still be able to steer.
All right. So this is a similar attribute to bats
I'm a bat or a whale. Yeah.
or whale and dolphins. And can you? Oh, so this is kind of left ball question. I'm
Go
just
for it.
really curious because they say this about dolphins, don't they? I've swum them a few times. That
Yeah.
with their sonar echoing system,
Yes.
they can tell if a woman is pregnant before the woman even knows because they have a sense of the
Yeah.
inner
Yeah.
ecosystem of the body. Do you have that kind of sense with your
Yeah.
time?
I mean, I do a lot of diagnosis with my clients by listening to their voice. So I can hear, I mean, my voice at the moment's not kind of very settled at the moment because I've had the flu for the last month. But if someone has got some trauma or some other thing, I can hear that they're not on their normal register of voice because everything goes here. Yeah.
Hmm.
So I'm always listening to that. And, I love to hear someone's voice, and then I can work out where we need to go in.
Okay, it's
But you
funny. It's
talked
like
about fish.
so. What? Sorry.
I said you talked about fish, but most members of my family were members of the Portsmouth Aqua Society, so they all kept fish. And I was born, I mean, you're going to love this one. I was born with two pairs of ears.
What?
Yes, they're called extraneous auricles. They're like little sort of, they're vestigial gill flaps that grow here. And
Uh,
they would obviously, if I was a fish, they would actually grow over my ears. But they were small, and they run in my family. So I think we probably, have a very strong, likely evolutionary relationship with it.
well, all I can say to that is, wow, wowie, zowie.
I,
Were they visible as a child?
yeah, absolutely. My son was born with them too, on
Okay,
one side, and I had plastic surgery to have them removed when I was 11.
all right.
They were considered unsightly in those days.
Of
So
course, what's going through my mind now is anytime I would come up to you and say, "How are you?" I actually ought to be saying, "How am I?" Because you're just hearing my voice. How am I?
but so I mean, so I think there were those things. But I mean, you called me workaholic, but I just work a full day's load as a performer. Usually, that's how I feel about it. I don't work beyond and above, but I do try when I'm teaching people to give them value for money, because I know how expensive it is for people to go to courses now. So yeah, but
Right.
uh,
Back to school. Back to school.
back to school, yes.
Teenage years. Hormones kick in. GCSE O levels kick in. A levels. What's going on for you then in terms of your echo chamber, resonance stuff,
Well,
and
I wanted to be an actor, and so most of my life was determined to get to that into that profession because I felt that was where I kind of should belong with the skills that I had. My parents were really against it, and I just went and had three auditions at drama school and got into one. So I was at Webber Douglas, which is where Anthony Sher and Julian Fellows and a lot of other people went after me. But
So, how old were you when you got in?
I was 18, and then I became very ill, and so we had a whole raft of autoimmune
So,
system.
so let me just pause you. A levels? Yes,
Yeah,
no.
yeah.
Okay. What in? Just curious.
So I mean, in those days, drama school, you didn't need anything to get
No,
in.
that's why I'm asking.
I know there was no degree system then. So you literally got in on your talent, and you beat off 600 to 800 other people to get a place
Okay, so
because
this
they only
was
had like 28 places you see a year. So
so you're 18.
I was 18.
So you're moving from Portsmouth to London.
Yes, yeah,
Okay, so I can imagine your parents going, "Yikes!"
yeah. I mean, they were just horrified, and to get a grant, I had to go to Winchester and audition before a bishop, a Lord Mayor, and some other important people who I didn't know. But it was very odd.
What
And
was your audition piece? Do you
they
remember?
gave me a full grant. I think I did Portia from Julius Caesar, so Brutus' wife, when she's pleading with Brutus. But the one I didn't do before the bishop was from Jean Ennui, which was L'Alouette, where Joan of Arc gets to swear quite a lot. I didn't do that one in front of the bishop.
Okay, but you did that in front of the
No,
other.
I did that in front of the board at drama school, so no, that got me in. But yeah, so I mean, so that was going on quite well. I was probably a bit young to be in London by myself, but but then I just got very ill. The autoimmune system diseases all kind of crept up on me, and there I was with colitis, which is like curtains to an acting career. And so, I needed a toilet 14 times a day. It was just
Mm.
that was just not going to happen. And so I went into very, very deep mourning, and I just lost weight and just lost weight and just became like, I was about 5 or 6 stone
Well, where were you living?
in London.
Yeah, in what kind of
I
circumstances?
was in Kensington.
In shared flat or?
No, I was living in I think it was an adapted bathroom, I think was what you would call it. Or what would now be described by an estate agent as a very valuable property, yes, where you could live for, in my case, £3.10 a week was pre-decimalisation. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah,
I'm just trying to get a picture of you, very young, physical health awful, lost the career you were dreaming of
yeah,
in this minute little space.
yeah. No, I mean, and about the same time, I made a very unfortunate marriage, which was not to anyone's advantage, as they say. Um, and I was sort of, going down, really going downhill, and not helped by the fact that my first husband was an alcoholic. So it was not a good situation. And I remember just lying in bed, and the old blanket came back again, blanket over the head, and and a consult with the shapers, and it's like, so what am I doing now? And they said, well, you could carry on doing this, what you're doing now, which was dying, or you could do what we show you. And I said, okay. I didn't know what that was, but they said, do you agree to that? And I said, I don't know what it is, but I'll give it a go. And then I began to get better.
Hmm.
Uh, I also, around the same time, was also, I'd known about John, and John and I ran away together. So all of this was happening all at the same time. It was tumbledy, wiggledy, piggledy.
So,
Really.
so you ran away from your marriage
Mm.
with
Yeah, my
John.
husband came home one night and said, I think we'll move to Essex and we'll grow cabbages and you can have 4 children. And my body took me to the top of the wardrobe to pull down the case. And he literally, because there were no phones in the house, in houses in those days, and he literally held on to my leg all the way down to the telephone box. And I phoned John and said, come and get me.
Okay, now, all right. So listen, for people who don't know, John Matthews has been your partner since then, and you've done extraordinary work together.
It was our 48th anniversary last year, last month. So,
But blessings and
which we're
congratulations.
going to thank you, which we're going to celebrate tomorrow, as we've both been unwell. So
Yeah.
that's why we're going to the theatre and having dinner tomorrow. But so yes, we've been together since then, and it wasn't easy sailing because my first husband was also a Welsh terrorist. So
Okay. So let's rewind. How did you meet John, who is
John
your
was at the library.
soul partner, work partner?
When I had been a little better, I was able to work in a library, and before I got very ill, and so I knew John from there, and I knew he was smitten with me. So I knew I would have a welcome there somewhere, but it was quite hard. We had to hide, so that because we were threatened with explosives and all kinds of nasty things. So we went
All
and
right. Let's just to pause again. Welsh terrorist for Welsh independence or
yeah, yeah.
Plaid Cymru type stuff? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, he'd done all that. I didn't know he'd done all that stuff before I met him. So it was like, so all that came out of the woodwork, and it was like, oh right, we might actually be in danger then.
Right.
So let's hide away.
So John, as well as fancying you, being smitten, did you and he realize at that point that you had a shared interest in the mysteries and
Yes,
mysticism?
but the Mabinogion came up at one time in the staff room, and so I went over to him. I heard him saying that, and I said, about the Mabinogion, and
Tell people what that is,
so the
because
Mabinogion is the British mythology, which we now call Welsh, but of course was the original inhabitants of Britain before everyone else came in. So those myths were very important to me, and of course they also included the collection that's called the Mabinogion also includes Arthurian um, stories from the early British tradition and in the medieval tradition. So obviously it was where John's interest lay. So there we were. But I already had an Irish interest because my mother's family were Irish. So and I grew up without my mother's family, and she grew up without her family. So it was all my youth. I've been trying to get my mother's family for her. So there was another ancestral element in this, which was quite important to how things turned out.
I'm trying to put a jigsaw together now. There's you who, under the blankie, is having a conversation with beings who are guiding you.
Yeah,
There's meeting John, which is a echo of your interest in the Celtic mysteries, for want of a
and
better
also
phrase.
he was intellectual like me. He was intelligent. We both read a lot, so we could have a good conversation. We met exactly. The marriage I was in was kind of you know,
Well,
not matching.
yeah, the Welsh terrorist does not sound attractive.
No, no, especially when he'd had imbibed of the cauldron, as they say.
Yeah, no, horrible.
Yeah,
So in your journey then with John, at a certain point, your background in, I'm guessing now, and you're going to have to correct me, at a certain point, your instinct for theatre plus your sense of sound plus your interest in the mysteries
yeah.
takes you into
The,
actual
the mystery,
ritual
the mystery
work.
were already in there because I'd read all around that, and I knew that that was my terrain. I mean, I just feel that a lot of my life has been what I call a catching up on other lives. You know, that sort of, oh, I used to do this. Oh, let's do that quickly. Okay, and then oh, I remember that too. Let's do that. And it was a lot of catching up and putting it together. And when it all rolled in together, it was like the sea was really in. It was like Western Superman. You know, they blow the whistle when the tide changes because the sea just literally comes in. So I think that was kind of happening. The waves were already beginning to happen.
Yeah, just brackets. There were a couple of cars on the western beach that got caught the
Yeah,
other day.
exactly, exactly. So, you know, so I think all of this sort of came together at that time, and it was okay. Now I'm in a safe place. We can do all this.
So, look, somewhere inside of all that, at some point, and this is what I'm curious about, at some point you must have said, oh, what I'm studying and looking at and interested in, that's actually me. I'm a player. I'm not just a student of it. I'm also a player. And
I
you
felt
come,
very, I felt very supported all the time. I
mm,
mean, I really, as a child, I knew that these things were really important, and you know, my talking to the shapers, you know, all these things. I knew that they were precious and that they were not the things to be put aside like an old teddy bear when you grow up, you know, but that they were absolutely key and essential. Um, and it wasn't until I'd reached that point where I was so ill that it was, you know, you either die or live. Um, that's when they stepped forward. I mean, I was getting better within 6 months of that experience. And then, you know, the key moment, I suppose, was, you know, there was one day when I was alone at home in a different flat in Kensington, and the shapers said, "Okay, stand in the middle of the room and dance." And I said, "Well, dance what? You know, I mean, anything in particular?" And dance had always been important to me. So anyway, I stood in the centre, and the clock was about, you know, 2:15 or something, and I started to dance, and I remember absolutely nothing else until I woke up and I was on the floor. I was in a pool of water, and because my rational mind was doing, oh, my neighbour's bath has overflowed, and here I am lying in a pool of water, and what's this? And and then I looked at the clock and realised it was more like 5:15. I'd been out completely. I had no idea what had happened to me. And I was lying in a pool of my own water. And what had happened, it took a long time to work it out, but what had happened was that my mistress spirit had come into me. And I was quite slow on the uptake in many ways, but I began to realize looking back, you know, after this, that what had happened to me was that I had embodied a spirit. Um, But then, if I look back on drama school and look at back how it was, I wasn't acting. I was embodying, which isn't the same thing. So I was actually quite dangerous as an actress. And of course, one of the first parts I played was Clytemnestra. And I just have to say that my Agamemnon was awfully glad to be killed off stage. Is all I can say. Because he was terrified most of the time. Because Clytemnestra was in the room, not me. So that was a whole other layer of this. So it was like, oh, right. That I was so very nearly right in my profession, and I was so completely wrong.
but listen, there's a thin dividing line here, which I think will be useful for people
Yeah,
listening,
yeah,
between ensouling something in sacred theatre
hmm
and mediumship.
yeah,
Do you want to just give a,
yeah.
how would
Indeed.
you
I
unpack
mean,
that?
I actually became that in that moment when I woke up in the pool of water. That's what had been happening, and of course, there was absolutely nobody around me who could guide me through that, explain that to me, make that okay in some way. You know, what was I to do with it? I had no idea. Um, and it took several months after that for me to get to a sense of, okay, It's never going to be like that again. Now I've recognized this, I can now come into a place of more control when that needs to happen. Um, and there were people around. My teacher, Dolores Ashcroft Noacky, of course, she knew from the mysteries this is precisely what happened in many places, and still does around the world. Um, Later on, people like Olivia Robertson, who is head of the Fellowship of Isis in Ireland, which is this worldwide organization which is for anyone who has a warmth and veneration for the goddess in whatever form. They were helpful and supportive, but they didn't do that. So my acting training had given me something, but it was not from further back in time. So there was something else that was catching up. So again, more sea coming in from Weston-super-Mare. So it's gradually, all these things coming together at the same time. And I did look around. I did try and find other people who'd had this experience. And of course, this was 1970s London. It was, there were lots of people taking drugs, but, this was not what I was doing. I've never done that, so I could get
did you identify the spirit that?
Oh yes,
So,
yeah.
can you share about that, or is it private?
So Mare Mother came to me, and Mare Mother is the one that still comes to me. She'll have an outing later this month when I'm teaching my students, but she always gets at least one good outing a year, in a very, what I would call, a more National Geographic and anthropological way. But obviously, when I'm working with clients, it's very subtle. So she can come on my voice.
Who is
Yes.
she?
She is a spirit who lives in the upper world, and she is partly woman and partly horse to look at. Or she could be wholly horse, or she could be wholly woman to look at. But she is both those things.
What kind of character, psychology has she?
I'm not sure that's a question I can answer.
Is she kind?
She is wholly herself, is all I can say, in a way that when you're with an animal, they are wholly themselves. They're not trying to play or pretend to be anything. They just are. And if you can calm yourself down enough and not be frightened and not be upset about anything, then the horse will stay with you. But if you've ever gone to get a horse from a field with a headstall with the intention of getting the horse in the headstall, this is like trying to give the cat worming tablets. It doesn't work. You can't impose your will on her. She is. And she sees things from a perspective that I can't see, which I don't know. And so if I don't know something about someone's case, she will.
Do you have if it's okay to ask, do you have a sense of their history, her history? Do you call her a she?
Well, I mean, we could look at all the sort of horse goddesses from, the Black Demeter Despina, who's known in southern Greece, right the way over to all the stories that we have in the sister islands of Britain and Ireland. That they're there. So we have Epona, we have people like Rhiannon. You go into Folkstore and you have the Haggary Nag. There are all of these beings, and she is kind of like, well, she's kind of like the archetype of all of those. So that's really all I can say about her. It's not. I'm only permitted to say that, but I don't think one could do her a life mythology.
It's funny when people talk about the weird world, WYRD.
Yeah.
There are beings who live in the weird world whom we meet, but their weirdness is such that we can hardly translate it into this human
No, we
culture.
really can't. I mean, but I think of I think of the Vedas, and I think of there's an incident in Hindu mythology where Shiva says to the gods, "Look, we've got the asuras, the demons are coming against us, and now we have to act. But we have to take every single god has to take their animal nature upon them." And the gods say, "Yeah, I'm not going to do that. I'm just really happy being a god." And he says, "No, no, no, we really must. We must do this now. And if we do this, if we assume our animal nature, then we will be able to overcome what the demons are bringing into the world." Um, and and one of the aspects of Shiva is Pasupati, who's the master of the animals, and we recognize him from Harappan culture, from southern Indian, that sort of top top left hand of India on the coast. That Harappan culture we see from places. This god who is cross-legged, who has horns on his head, and he's almost exactly the same figure as Cernunnos in Celtic tradition, and whom we see on the Gundestrup cauldron, which was found in Denmark at the end of the 19th century. So these, and there you have a man's body cross-legged, and a stag's antlers on his head. He has he has a snake in one hand, and in the other he holds a torque, which of course is the emblem of nobility. It's metalwork, and it's the kind of thing you wear to show your status in Celtic culture. So this extreme bringing together of the animal nature, and what it is to be a human being in one place, but in the shape of a god. So I think these are the things that we have: animal nature, we have our own humanity, and there is that part of us that responds to the divine in this extraordinary way, which we see throughout world culture, which is just the heart of this mystery. Um, and we all have something to offer, and we are all in an extraordinary relationship to all that is in this world as a result. Um, so I think um, there is a beauty and a mystery in this world that speaks with extreme necessity. I mean, even in Plato, you get this extraordinary mixture. If you look at the Timaeus, there's the part where he talks about intellect and necessity being together. So you have the highest understanding that humans can attain, and necessity. And necessity is, she's spoken of as a Nanki or adrasteya, and those two extremes are in us. And we know, like we all know as human beings, what is good for us to do, right? Our intellect says it would be good to stop drinking brandy every day, or whatever it is that you're trying to stop doing. And actually, it isn't until the doctor says to you, "Oh, no, if you don't stop drinking brandy, your liver will corrode and you will die." And you think, "Damn!" And then adrasteya, ananki comes up, necessity comes and makes you do what your intellect has told you. So between these two things, we operate, but there is something more than that. There is a divine balance, which is what we um, what we really need in our world, and that's, I think, what the spirit of Mare Mother is serving.
I'm now bubbling with two completely separate directions to take the conversation. I'm going to tell you what the two directions are, and then we'll see where we go. One
Yeah.
direction is, because I've been looking at the state of the world, like we all have, and it's all a little bit unsafe compared to what it was 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
And I keep thinking to myself, Planet of the Apes, Planet of the bloody apes again, right? And what you've just described
Mm.
in terms of the godlings and the relationship of humanity is I'm curious as to what your take is on the current state of the planet. That's one theme. What is your take on the current state of the planet in relation to the whole weird ecosystem? And the other question is, in all the books and stuff you've done over the last 5 decades, what's been your driving force? So let's
Okay,
focus let's
gonna have
focus
to
on the
divide
first
it,
one
I
first, and then
suppose.
do the second one.
I think we'll divide those questions. So I
Yeah.
think my take on the way things are at the moment is that we are throughout the world living out of a really difficult ancestral set of prejudices which are causing all the wars. So, you know, the Welsh coin, the Welsh pound coin, has a little inscription around it. It says Pleidiol Wifim Glad, which means something like, I'm partial to my own country. And it's like, yeah, we all are. You know, if we're born in a place or we love a place, you know, that's kind of, we'll be rooting for them. If our country was in a sports match, we'd root for our country. Yeah. Um, and everyone has their own specific prejudices. So you cannot make a Daily Star reader into a Daily Telegraph reader, for example, and you can't, you know, that's not going to happen. Um, but the deep ancestral prejudices that have come, whether it's through tribal boundaries or whatever it is, um, or whether the kinds of things that arise from different kinds of religious affiliation or tribal affiliation, um, then those are getting in the way all the time. And we're not able, you know, to try and bring um, balance between any situation. We're going to need all those parts of ourselves. We'll need the animal side, the human side, the divine side to all come together and work together on this because these seem to be, you know,
Why is it so crap at the moment?
it's really bad at the moment.
Yeah. Why is?
And
Do
I
you
mean,
see some hope in it?
the myth, I mean, you know, the untruth, I won't call it a myth because I regard myth as the truest thing that is. As Solustius said in concerning the gods, you know, myth myth is something that has never happened and is happening all the time. Um, so I would say, but the untruth of growth, that we must have growth, economic growth, it's like, well, actually, you know, while it's nice to make a little profit, it's that's very nice. But now we're in a state where, you know, our country's being sold off to who knows what and who knows where. And like Thames Water, I'm a sufferer under Thames Water. They administrate my water. Thames Water is owned by someone outside our country, and Thames Water have to pay monies to the shareholders of Thames Water, whoever they are, meaning they just want their money. They don't want things cleaned up or sewers to be mended or whatever else needs to be done. They're not interested in the River Wye, you know, whoever looks after that water authority, or the River Thames here. So, you know, we're in a sort of priorities have got into a very strange way, a very strange way. And part of being online, um, I think possibly has also unhinged a few people. That we're not doing things with our hands, we're not doing things with our bodies in the same way. They're all kind of happening nicely off somewhere. I don't know. There are a lot of things that where the reality of something is not present with us, and so we make these short-term decisions which are terrible for our world. I was talking to someone the other day, and we were talking about this concept, which comes out of the Haudenosaunee tradition, the Mohawk tradition, which is one of the founding sets of government which sort of underlies the American Constitution on one level. And their sense was that you never made any decisions because if they unless you had considered the ninth generation. But that doesn't mean what we mean by generation. An indigenous generation is a living memory. So, for instance, just taking my own instance, my living memory would be my children and their children, and it would be my parents and their parents and their parents. That's like 5 or 6 generations in ordinary terms, in Western terms, and that's considered a generation. So 9 generations is actually more like 900 years. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we had a government that thought like that? Just
Any,
just think about
do you see any rays of hope?
Well, the usual thing, I mean, good old necessity comes along, and necessity puts us in a position where we really have to think straight and properly and act, not just out of necessity, but with honor. And usually that means things get worse first. I'm afraid to say.
On to the second question,
The second question, yes.
which was,
yes, where were we? Yes.
what's all the 80 books, all the work?
Yeah.
What's been your motivation?
Not a one thing. It's not a one thing.
Well, name the different things then.
I write about what I'm interested in and what I know and understand. And over the years, I've understood it differently, as you do, as you mature and you live more in the world. So I will always write those things that interest me. And many things interest me. I love history. I love to help people make sense of esoteric things, which are not very well explained very often, or which have many people have come through very new age things, which are not they're the twigs on the tree, not the roots of the tree. And so I like to always go to source material, and to work from that source upwards, because I think that reconnects people. There are lots of things I've not written about, but which I've taught about all the time. I can get absolutely no publisher interested in doing anything on the ancestors. And most of my work is working with ancestors. But I'm teaching that all the time in everything I do. And that's always a prime consideration, that the honor that we have for our ancestors is the honor that we have for our descendants. And we can't have one without the other. And at the moment, everyone's living their lives as if this life were all there was, and that this side of reality was all that there is. And until we open that out, things are not going to be right, because we can't make one half of the world beautiful. We can uglify the other side and completely ignore it. So I'm always trying to make the bridge. I mean, the mysteries, in the mysteries, we always talk about the sense of joining heaven and earth. Yes, which is one way of looking at that. From a more shamanic perspective, I feel it's kind of like, like my scarf here, that there is one side of reality that we see and the other side that we don't see, but they are complementary and they clothe us all the time. If there were only one side of reality, I would be sitting here naked, because I'd be in shreds. And most lives are in shreds because people they're not weaving the two together. They're not bringing the two sides of the worlds together. So that's always been my drive.
Pose the question in a slightly different way. There are quite a lot of folk, including me, who've suffered from a kind of hubris, and at the same time a kind of utopian thinking, that there was something meaningful about the shift between Pisces and Aquarius on a planetary scale, that there was some shifts happening in terms of culture and energy, which we saw in the deconstruction of a lot of ageism, a lot of sexism, and a lot of racism. And we were very hopeful that something useful was being seeded and emerging. And some people were far too enthusiastic and naive about it, but a lot of us had a sense that there was something as meaningful as Renaissance happening. There was something cooking, and that we who were authors and teachers in that world, even at our most humble, we were nevertheless kind of instruments of that shift. And a lot of people would have projected onto you and John that your souls had in some way or another contracted or volunteered to be one of the spearheads of this shift. And a lot of your work was to do with a renaissance of indigenous British Isles spirituality.
Northwest European.
Northwest European, yeah, which is why I pointed to the Western way, right?
But it's not all it is.
I know. So I'm just wondering how you feel about all that.
I've always felt from from the late 70s and 80s onwards, I've always felt that we're part of something much bigger. We're never going to see the end of it in our lifetimes. It's like the story of the 10 just men, isn't it? Which is in Genesis. It's like, God, will you destroy Sodom? If there are 50 good people in it, would you just don't destroy it? And of course, it's this great tradition of the Lamed Vow in Jewish tradition, which is there it is believed that there are at least 42 just people on earth who enable things to keep going. And I often tell this story to people, not that I consider myself to be one or in any way, although I think I've met one or two, but they're not the kind of people who are out there. They're really in there. And, you pass them in the street and just think, oh, well, that's a market trader or that's a housewife or whatever. But, so people often say when I tell this story, so how many just people do you think there are? And it's like, well, enough. We don't know who they are. And, their work is that solid, deep connection with all that is, that cohesively holds this world together. But however many there are in whatever tradition you go to, but that's all part of a much, 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 much longer wave that we can't see the beginning of, and we will not see the end of, not in one human life. But we're part of it. We make up a huge wave, all of us. I was just in Watkins yesterday, and of course they've got their Mind, Body, Spirit magazine, which has got the 100 most influential people, and the guy behind the counter, because John was buying a box, said, "You can have one of those if you like." And I said, "No, I don't need it, thank you very much." I don't care who it is, because I know that that's made up of an algorithm of how many people have been mentioned on the internet, how many flipping times they have, But it's like, that's not the point of this. This is a much, much larger thing. And I know that every day you turn on the television, the news is there, and it feels like, now, here, this is the most important thing. And of course, yes, it is, and no, it isn't. So much is made up of decisions we took in history, things that people did and decided then, and we are still living with the consequences of them. The whole of America is living still with the consequences of the American Civil War, for example. We're still living with colonial decisions that were taken in this country over very many centuries. And the consequences of, dividing up the Middle East after the First World War. The Sykes-Picot line comes to mind, that those, my grandfather was a child soldier in Mesopotamia. He wasn't a combatant, but he ran between the lines with shells, with ammunition as a 12-year-old. Yeah. So I kind of, that feels very close to me, that I have always had a very strong commitment to the people of Iraq as a result of that, because I feel a connection of that, and I feel a resonance of that in my own family. So there are all those things going on all the time. And we can become very hopeless and despairing and upset. And we can just decide to turn off, which a lot of people do. Um, but we are engaged in our lives, and it's the way we engage in our lives and how we do that, and um, the joy that is in our hearts, the way we just greet people simply. I mean, all those little things, what the Catholics call sacramentals, the little things we do every day which keep the world holy, whether it kindling a fire, kissing a child, sending a nice card to a friend who's having a horrible time, comforting a widow, all of these things. They are all holy work. And the holy work that we do is part of what holds the world together as part of this huge great wave. So I don't know. You can talk about it in all kinds of theories and yugas and eons and all the rest of it, but um, our work is here and now, and it's also part of something that began before us. Something that R.J. Stewart says, which I feel is very beautiful, which that he says that, when you look at an ancient sacred site, he said, you think of it as a nice place to visit or whatever, but actually the ancestors built this for us, not for themselves, but for us. And I suppose you could say the same thing about Salisbury Cathedral, which was put up very quickly indeed in 57 years, and which has just had its scaffolding taken down for another time. But all these things were built for us, um, and for those who are after us. And that's got to be important for us. However, where we find our holiness, where we find our connection with the world, where balance can be brought in however small a way, that's what matters.
Yeah. And and all will be well. All will be very well. But it's the patience to be with that, isn't it? There's somebody emailed me yesterday saying, "Hey, William, tell me something good. Tell me that it's going to be all right." And I didn't know what to respond. And what was going on in my head? Well, just hang around for 2 or 3 thousand years. You may see the kind of shift
Well,
that you want to see.
it's what the poet Cavafy said. He said, "Just wait a few moments, and someone completely indispensable will come along," which puts us right in our place, doesn't it? Which is really where we are with that. Um, but yes, we're part of a much greater movement, which is, where the world is being broken, there also can the healing be. And this is precisely what Mother Julian says. She doesn't just say that famous saying, she says something actually much, much, much more interesting. And it's the words of Christ who says, and I will make well all that is unwell, which I think is a good saying for today. Yeah, all that is unwell. Um, uh, and I love that she saw no one in hell, because it's such a horrible invention. Yeah.
So look, we've done an hour. So we're going into winding up time. I didn't warn you, and this is an ask, and it's: would you like to say or sing even a prayer or a blessing for us, or say a few words to bring this session to a close in whatever way you think is appropriate?
Oh, well,
And
so this will be what comes. This is not prepared, so let's just put our feet on the ground wherever we are, and be aware of the directions all around us, the world we see and the world we don't see, all of it cohering together. And you can join in this because you're muted, because we can't sing online together, which is really annoying. But there we are. But we can still sing. So whenever we're in doubt, always sing into the darkness. And the darkness will show us the wisdom. Always. Thank you, William.
Wow.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Kathleen. I'll say no more, except just to say big, big thank you from my heart.
Thank you.
Blessings.
Thank you
Much gratitude.
for being here tonight.